Iwan nyo na po dyan sa lobby. Opo.
Cal University has existed for more than 100 years. It is cool to be part of this traditional yet global institution that embraces cultural diversity.
My professors have been so helpful and encouraging. They guide me to the right coursework and program. They continue to teach me to strive for academic excellence.
I'm comfortable with the facilities, particularly with the Learning Commons, as it offers a lot of rooms to study and research. Also, the assistance and support of library personnel are superb.
My exchange experience opened doors of opportunities I did not know I could have before. It was a very life-changing, unexpected journey, and it undoubtedly is the highlight of my college experience.
The program has helped me deal with people from different backgrounds and work ethics, and it is a learning experience that would forever leave a mark in me.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Philippine National Anthem.
Mayang magiliw, pelas na silangan, alalam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan na ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka masisi. Sa dagat at mundong sasimoy at sa langit mamahal, may nilagang tulat, awit sa panlayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdidinig. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng luwal, ating pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya lamang may mamati, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Good morning. Let's listen to a musical performance by Johann Vladimir Espiritu and Ivar Fojas. They are faculty members and associate professors of the Department of Literature at De La Salle University, and both of them are brilliant music artists. Let's hear their rendition.
You give me hope, the strength, the will to keep on. No one else can make me feel You know the tears can't help but show. You break this heart and tear it apart. Then suddenly the madness starts. It's your smile, your face, your lips that I miss. Those sweet little eyes that stare at me and make me sad. I'm with you through all the way, 'cause it's you who fills the emptiness in me. It changes everything you see when I know I've got you with me. You pushed me up when I'm about to give up. You're on my side when no one seems to listen. And if you go, you know the tears can't help but show. You break this heart and tear it apart. Then suddenly the madness starts. It's your smile, your face, your lips that I miss. Those sweet little eyes that stare at me and make me sad. I'm with you through all the way, 'cause it's you who fills the emptiness in me. It changes everything you see when I know I've got you with me. It's your smile, your face, your lips that I miss. Those sweet little eyes that stare at me and make me say, I'm with you through all the way, 'cause it's you who fills the emptiness in me. It changes everything you see when I know I've got you with me.
All right, shall we start? Okay, good morning. Welcome to the second day of Rethinking Heritage and Heritage Futures, a web conference workshop. Okay. In this second day, we have the fourth panel on heritage research. This fourth panel raises questions such as what is heritage research in the 21st century? What critical and interdisciplinary approaches can we further adopt to work towards an understanding and conservation of our heritage? What new histories can we reconstruct, and how can we rethink heritage preservation and practices to make them more relevant to the present and to the future? How do we rethink heritage research and practices to manifest the distinctiveness of our culture? And are there any other directions that we can embark on? Okay. May we request the panel, okay, to turn on their camera so that the audience can see you? All right, so may I introduce the panel, and then one by one, you take your turn to speak, okay. For the audience, you may post your questions at the chat box or at the Q&A, okay? So each panelist will have some time to deliver their presentation, and then afterwards, we have this conversation, okay? The first speaker, Dr. Eric Zaru is the director of the University of Santo Tomas Graduate School Center for Conservation of Cultural Property and the Environment in the Tropics. Okay, so Eric is very much into heritage conservation, cultural heritage development, and heritage studies. Okay, the second speaker, we have Miss Madame Feliz Prudentes Santa Maria. Okay, she is a cultural worker and has been a cultural worker for 5 decades. Okay, her book, A Cultural Worker's First Manual, Essays in Appreciating the Everyday, is a classic reference and award-winning book for heritage workers. The third speaker is Professor Nick De Ocampo. Okay, he is an award-winning maker and also a historian. Okay, so Nick De Ocampo's engagement with nonfiction filmmaking has allowed him to produce works covering issues from social change and gender representation to environmental challenges. His involvement with cinema spanned more than 30 years, okay? And in a sense, this helped him advance the cause for film heritage, okay? And Nick De Ocampo served as chair of the UNESCO Philippines Memory of the World Committee and was formerly president of NETPA, or Network for the Promotion of Asia Pacific Cinema. And the last speaker, Dr. Ferrilio Petronilo Demeterio III, is the director of the De La Salle University Research Coordination Office. He is also a scholar of Philippine studies. Okay, so may we welcome our panelists, and can we begin with Dr. Eric Zerudo?
Thank you very much, Shirley. So before I begin, may I request indulgence of our audiences that allow me to switch off my video to have a stronger connection, and so we can have an uninterrupted presentation for this morning. So allow me to share my screen. Good morning to all heritage frontliners and onliners. Thank you to De La Salle University for this kind invitation to share my study on heritage significance. The title of this presentation is Significance as Method, Developing a Paradigm of Architectural Heritage Declaration through the Analysis of Methodologies of Conservation Management Plans in the Philippines. My curiosity to study declaration of heritage sites was prompted by 3 recent controversies. First, the national agencies approved the demolition of nationally significant structures that caused acrimonious dissent nationwide, particularly the demolition of the Sunico House in Binondo and the Film Life building in United Nations Avenue. Second, the ICOMOS Philippines interns last year conducted a study entitled Project Alexandria on the dossiers of declared sites, which revealed the absence of a scientific methodology and evidence to ground cultural significance of the site. And the third is the fact that the regulatory function for declaration was transferred from the National Museum already to the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. This is based on Republic Act 11333 of 2019. Now, if you look at it, the bigger context of the heritage law, Republic Act 10066, this law actually reinforced this ambiguous and quite confused situation. 3 national agencies overlap in functions regarding declaration, technical assistance, conservation process, regarding immovable heritage, indigenous peoples, export repatriation, cultural property, cultural education, and workers' incentives. Even the definition of terms, these could have been more specific and exacting. Look at this. The meaning of important cultural property and national cultural treasure actually is one and the same. Philippine contemporary approach to heritage conservation is defined. It's almost dictated by the UNESCO World Heritage Center. because of its value-based approach. After World War II, the ideas of world polity, universalization, and rationalization of virtue and virtuosity emerged, which paved the adoption of this concept, outstanding universal value. OUV is composed of 10 criteria of evaluation. Criteria 1 to 7, 1 to 6 is actually cultural heritage, and criteria 7 to 10 is on natural heritage. The next criteria or the next set is the test of authenticity and integrity, and the last one is protection and management. Value-based approach is considered as the international standard, and this is very well integrated in our heritage law, Republic Act 10066. Value-based approach means significance setting. Our topic for this conference is about heritage. Heritage is a human construct that ascribes value to expressions of the past, that gives meaning and identity to the present, and ensures that the resource continues up to the future. This definition highlights three things: the crucial role of man, heritage assessment, and the transmission of this value across three time dimensions, past, present, and future. So basically, the inclusive definition emphasizes significance assessment as meaning making that leads to world assembling. Significance is the value of the heritage resource for past, present, and future generations. Now, there have been voluminous studies on significance, and the interest to simplify, or sometimes even complicate it, continues to this day. Our study focuses on architectural heritage. It is defined to include the following permanent properties, such as monuments, groups of buildings, and sites. Significance of architectural heritage is exemplified and explicitly stated in the Conservation Management Plan. A CMP is a requirement under Republic Act 10066. So for our study, I set up a selection criteria for the CMPs to be analyzed and reviewed. And we're going to review the CMP of the UST main building, the CMP of the Basilica Minore de San Sebastian, the CMP of the Manila Central Post Office building, and the CMP of Intramuros, Manila. Now, this is a qualitative inductive inquiry that analyzed patterns and methodologies for significance assessment and their themes. We also conducted a lot of observations, and we hope that with this humble endeavor, we are able to provide a better understanding of significance assessment, impress the demanding level of multidisciplinary research, and propose levels of assessment to guide our protocols for declaration. This is a research design. It's a process flow. The CMP methodologies and their consequential significance are non-analyzed. 3 build-up levels structure the evaluation process. Level 1, significance narratives are patterned into themes. Level 2, methodologies and significance narratives are transected into 2 axes, time and attribute. So we will have framed quadrants. Quadrant 1, historical approach, physical attribute. Quadrant 2, historical approach, social attribute. Quadrant 3, contemporary approach, physical attribute. And quadrant 4, contemporary approach, social attribute. The last level is actually on community investment regarding conservation action. So hopefully with these 3 levels, we're able to come up with a system of architectural heritage declaration. Okay, let's begin. The first case study is the proposed conservation guidelines of the UST main building as a conservation or a built heritage. How did this come about? The CMP of the UST main building was developed in time for the 2011 quadricentennial. This topic was a graduate thesis of 2 pioneering cultural heritage students, architect Clarissa Avendaño. May her soul rest in peace. She died last March 2021 due to COVID. And architect Willa Solomon of the College of Architecture. Because of this study, range of methodologies were undertaken on the building, and to highlight historical approach, physical dimension, historical archival researches on various archives, libraries, and Dominican sources of information. Historical approach, social dimension, we have review of annual reports, literary studies, and volumes of religious publications. Contemporary approach, physical dimension, we conducted condition survey and damage assessments. And contemporary approach, social dimension, oral investigation, and survey on stakeholders' perceptions. So because of these methodologies, the significances surfaced quite a lot. So for historical approach physical dimension, so the main building was a strategic position playing an important role in the development of the USA campus. Historical approach social dimension, you've got educational and scientific value, the Dominican Central Academic Landmark, the largest Catholic university in the world. Contemporary approach physical dimension, you have the scientific value that Padre Roque Arwaño's design building was the first earthquake-proof reinforced concrete superstructure of the country in 1927. Contemporary to social dimension, so educational value, it continues to be the center of administration for education needs of religious and higher education in the country. So what will be our narrative? What's the state of significance? The Royal Pontifical Catholic University of Santo Tomas is the oldest continuous university in the Philippines, established in 1611, and the largest Catholic university in the world. The main building in the 21-hectare campus is the first earthquake-proof concrete superstructure of the Philippines, built by Father Roque Arwaño, that served as a physical, educational directionals of the country and propelled the development of the Sampaloc district of Manila. It symbolized the Dominican's tradition and value for education, evangelization, that produced civil and religious leaders in the international and national scene. Now, our second case study is the Conservation Management Plan of the Manila Central Post Office Building. Now, what's the background for this? The post office building continues to serve as the terminus of the main artery of Manila to other parts of the metropolis. But the role of the Postal Corporation has been dramatically reduced with the impact of information technology to the lives of the Filipinos. This decontextualization led to the development of a conservation management plan to evaluate the feasibility of new functions to the building. So the team applied various methodologies, somewhere, historical approach physical dimension, historical research and government archives, historical approach social dimension, memory surveys on employees and even senior citizens. Contemporary approach physical dimension, they included exterior analysis, interior analysis, and damage assessments. Contemporary approach social dimension, forward-looking studies were conducted on the erratum reuse analysis of post offices in other parts of the globe. The significance emerged. Historical archaeological significance. The site of the post office building was actually the Parian. This was an important history in the development of the Filipino nation. Historical approach social dimension. Social significance, the building offered a broad set of services to the public, that it became a hub for this archipelago where all the people all over the Philippines were able to connect. Contemporary approach physical dimension, architectural aesthetic significance. Note that the building represents an original contribution to the panorama of neoclassical Beaux-Arts architecture in the Philippines. And for potencies, it has its physical adaptive reuse potential with the need for a robust feasibility study. What is our statement significance? The Central Post Office building epitomized the apex of progress and network of the Philippines during the American period. This showcased advances in building construction, postal technology, and communication system. Designed by Juan Arellano, it is an outstanding example of neoclassical and Beaux-Arts architecture. Exceptionally authentic and integral, these were reinforced by the assam of contemporary Arellano structures in the vicinity of the Manila Metropolitan Theater and its bridges. Its location is archaeologically significant, as the Parian site of Intramuros is a narrative in the development of the Filipino nation. We have the Basilica Minore de San Sebastian. Here, our rationale is the fact that this Basilica Minore de San Sebastian, the only still church of Asia, has been experiencing material deterioration and structural issues impacted by contextual environmental constraints. So for the past decades, palliative interventions were undertaken that eventually led to a commissioned CMP to definitively establish a comprehensive set of policies and strategies based on science to guide corrective actions. So the methodologies were employed, but remember, this is one of the most heavily documented structures in the Philippines. Historical approach physical dimension, a comparative history of the construction methodology was undertaken. Historical approach social dimension, the researchers conducted a genealogical study on Bernardino del Castillo. Contemporary approach physical dimension, 3D scanning was employed. And contemporary approach social dimension, the researchers utilized a community survey of the Bukas Quiapo tours. Because of this, exemplary significances surfaced. So historical approach physical dimension, aesthetic integrity, was the few surviving neo-Gothic structures in the whole country, which marks its rarity value as the only steel church in Asia. Historical approach, social dimension, social responsibility to the community, the memory of gentility that characterized the Quiapo district. Contemporary approach, physical dimension. Please note that this has high functionality, visuality, commanding presence in the skyline. It's considered as a pièce de résistance in the assemblage of Quiapo community. Contemporary approach, social dimension, it bears and provides pride and spiritual refuge for the community. So what is our narrative here? Basílica Minor de San Sebastián is globally significant as the only steel church in Asia, contributing to historicity, material authenticity, compositional aesthetics, visual integrity, and of course, technological advancement. These attributes amplify its connection to the European tradition of Neo-Gothic movement. The site is central to Philippine religiosity, particularly because of the Dungaw of the Black Nazarene and the Filipino devotion to the Carmel. It is iconic in the skyline of Manila, which marked the Gentile district at the turn of the century, and amidst the development pressures, church endures as a symbol of the Costinian Recollect service to the Filipino. Our last is the Intramuros Conservation Guideline. Now, what prompted the CNP for this? The urgent task to produce the CNP for Intramuros was due to the construction of the Virondo Intramuros Bridge, which began in 2016. This alarmed the UNESCO World Heritage Center regarding the impact of the infrastructure development to the historic properties under the World Heritage OG 172. Although it is not a World Heritage property per se, the Intramuros walls and the district serve as the buffer zone to the World Heritage Site of San Agustin Church, an important component of the serial church list of the Philippines. Again, one of the sites in the whole country that's heavily documented. So historical approach, physical dimension methodologies, archival investigations on the history of the site development, especially the development of the grid pattern, comparative histories with other Spanish colonial settlements, historical approach, social dimension. So here, there were a lot of photo reviews, film reviews, literary studies, and even for contemporary approach physical dimension, this enjoyed condition survey, point cloud 3D scanning, and other technical applications. Now, if you look at the case study of Intramuros, there were like 2 pages of statement of significances. So here you have the universe of significances, which was quite overwhelming. And if we compress it, maybe in one sentence, you'll understand that Intramuros is a layered history. It is distinct in every era. So it is a layered history of resiliency where every colonial phase is distinct that renders it. We call this as a palimpsest significance. So these are additions to the statements of significance. Now we move on to our analysis and consolidation of this little study. Consolidating the data, methodologies answer how to arrive at a decision of significance. They could be categorized into quadrants. So if you look at quadrant 1, this focuses on archival research, really, archaeological studies. Quadrant 2, more on oral history and literary studies. Quadrant 3, actual condition survey, even 3D LiDAR scanning. And quadrant 4, more on group discussions and feasibility studies. So the standard approach emanates from quadrant 1, supplemented by quadrant 2 and 3, and an optional methodology, which is quadrant 4. Now, the next matrix illustrates the thresholds of significance. With the aforementioned methodologies, the qualifiers of significance also follow. So if you have those set of significance, then the significance typologies would have Q1 deals on authenticity and integrity, Q2 on narrativity and transmissibility, Q3 on stability and functionality, and Q4 on the feasibility and viability of your architectural heritage. With the methodologies and significance matrices, we can surmise the motivation of the researcher on the study. Q1 is more of essentialism, Q2 is narrativism, Q3 is constructivism, and Q4 is instrumentalism. Now, the same dynamics would follow because you had your methodologies, you had your significances, and you will see here that the motivation, the initiative of your researcher would also follow, likewise from the essentialist attitude to an instrumentalist attitude. Essentialist defines the place according to meaningful, distinct qualities. Narrativist collects associative stories to provide holistic identity. Constructivist formulates technical activities for metric analysis, and instrumentalist advocates transformative conservation science to improve the management decision. So for the significance narratives of CMPs, themes could be patterned. If you look at the UST, Post Office, San Sebastian, Intramuros narratives, these 4 case studies give you masterpieces of Filipino creative genius. They are all exceptional testimony of Philippine cultural traditions and also exceptional examples of a type of building, architecture, and technological ensemble. Now, for Post Office and Intramuros, they give you an illustration of a traditional human settlement wherein man interacts with nature. And finally, UST, San Sebastian, and Intramuros give you sites that are well associated with events or living traditions. So you have here themes of significance already. We have already developed the criteria for level 1. So we have here themes of significance, represents a masterpiece of Filipino creative genius, bears a unique exceptional testimony to Philippine cultural traditions, an outstanding exceptional example of a type of building or architecture, outstanding exceptional example of a traditional human settlement, and finally, structures and sites that are associated to events or living traditions. Now, for level 2, you make sure that you move to level 2 qualifier significance. Just the same, you will go first to level 1 regarding authenticity and integrity, Q2, narrativity and transmissibility, Q3, stability and functionality, and Q4, viability and feasibility. The last level is the viability of value. This tells you the last level probes into the interest, involvement, investment of the community in terms of their conservation of the architectural heritage. It tells you exactly how much they are willing to put in terms of resources to ensure the protection and promotion of this particular site. So on the last part, we'll look at the categorization of architectural heritage. Here you have the Paradigm Architectural Heritage Declaration. 3 levels: themes of heritage, qualifiers, and viability. If the architectural heritage evaluation passed through all these levels, you become a national cultural treasure. But if you are able to pass level 1, you pass level 2, but fail level 3, you are an ICP. You pass level 1, you fail level 2, and you pass level 3, then you are still an ICP. Now, what are some of our recommendations? I believe there should only be one declaring agency supported by the community and the academe. NCTs are models of good conservation practice. ICPs are in wanting, but they should be capacitated. They should receive support from the national government. Architectural heritage declaration should be reviewed and reclassified. There should be a moratorium for some time. Then the community should be empowered to research and conserve their heritage. In conclusion, I think it is important to think of significance not just as a concept, but this concept conjures content, but also methodologies. Methodologies provides various outputs such as narratives, thresholds, motivations, and futures. These outputs can facilitate the formulation of a scientific system of declaration for architectural heritage. With that, thank you very much, and magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eric Zerudo, for that very rich and eye-opener of presentation, okay, where he put emphasis on significance, okay, as this complex set of methodologies and variables that we have to consider in order to have a more scientific approach, no, in the assessment of our architectural heritage sites. Okay, that is so rich, Eric. I think we need to take up a course under you. Okay, thank you very much. May we have Madame Feliz Santa Maria? Ma'am, go ahead. Let's welcome her.
Thank you. I'm relying on you, Shirley, for my slides.
Okay. May I share screen?
Yes, please. If you want, take me off and put the slide. It's up to you.
Okay, here.
Okay, so good morning, and it's a pleasure to be with our Philippine cultural advocates. And we are switching now from tangible heritage to intangible heritage. And I will discuss the role of food heritage in helping us individually act and not just keep hoping or keep wanting to make lifestyle choices beneficial to the common good. May we have the second slide, please? Because you see, the ultimate success of sustainable cultural heritage is societal well-being. And the slides I will show you are very few. They're not going to be the cute little antique slides from food history. I want us to take a macro view of our heritage work so we do not forget that the research discoveries which we all adore finding need to be useful, or as Eric said, valuable, significant. We studied the chronological development of our food based on written evidence as far back as possible. We have a lot of anthropological studies, sociological studies, and a lot of oral history or oral narratives, but we do not have enough of the evidence, written evidence-based food history to add the many layers of its significance, as Eric was talking about. Now, food history research is transdisciplinary. One can study food within different subject areas, such as these 10, which I will just enumerate. There is no slide. The 10 areas include everything from education and related communications, enterprise and labor, flora, fauna, natural habitats, home life, law, philosophy, religion, science and technology, as well as in all the bibliographies that cite dictionaries, cookbooks, travel accounts, and ephemera. You see, food history records transitions affecting our food chain and its 8 culinary stages, which range from food sourcing to making food products, processing food, storing food, distributing food, food service and presentation, consumption. That includes the taboos, diet and etiquette, and the last stage, which is waste and disposal, that includes recycling. So as you can see, food history is not collecting trivia only. Food history looks into recurring patterns, such as hunger, and what was done before to prevent hunger or mitigate its consequences. The earliest record, in fact, is during the first circumnavigation in 1521. The Battle of Mactan, when Magellan was killed, as I have been pointing out, has a food story. Both combatants feared food insecurity, and Magellan threatened to burn any village that refused to give him the food quota he demanded. So you see, food history plots many stories, including how colonial food became aspirational and how it was nativized. No one has forced foreign ingredients or foreign dishes on us. We select, up to now, the new foreign ingredients and dishes for our cooking. You see, intangible heritage is extremely dynamic, and food is one of the most dynamic elements of culture. So food history is not only about the origin of dishes, family heirloom foods, old recipes, and disappearing agreements. Allow me to note that food history even shows how food has been used in creating the international Philippine image, what I call the Philippine brand, since 1898. Bear with me because I don't have slides other than these that focus on the overall most important usefulness of what we are researching. More recent food history shows Philippine entrepreneurs taking global trends and creating Filipino fast food chains, convenience products to make Philippine food quickly available anywhere in the world, and even disaster and emergency food rations These are Philippine made that can be dropped from 1,000 meters and survive in flood waters. Our food history seems to indicate that we can function flexibly in changing economic, commercial, and scientific situations. So the most severe challenge now is that to the natural habitat. But whether or not our traditions, and that includes the food traditions, will endure, depends on each generation. What does that generation think? Can our old foods compare with new foods and food fashions? Put another way, can our new foods be influenced or nativized by Filipino culinary traditions, as has happened over centuries? May we switch now, Shirley, to the third slide, please. You see, as I was pointing out, why are we in all of this cultural heritage advocacy? Let us look at the big picture. Human development is the overarching quest for societal comfort and betterment, or what we sometimes call well-being. Human development to which governments like ours pledge enable people to have wider choices for their basic needs: physical survival and health, level of knowledge, livelihood, income, political freedom, peace, the robustness of traditions. The UN Creative City Strategy, for which Baguio is a member, for instance, the goal of the creative aspect of the creative arts is not only to keep them robust, to keep them beautiful, to keep them active, but to help them earn for Baguio City or any UN creative city. Cultural heritage work, as shown on the screen, is embedded in the cultural development strategies used for human development. We position food history to help tourism, home economics, culinary education, health, the identification of heirloom botanicals, establishing diplomatic ties through food, strengthening local and national identities, making people feel, this is most important. And we position food history to help ordinary people feel daily cooking offers a sense of pride and self-worth. Food history even has so many examples how Filipinos have coped when they undervalued themselves and when we had to deal with racial prejudice. Next slide, please. And this one we're going to hold. The fourth slide we're going to hold for quite a while. So think about what this fourth slide is saying. Our heritage work has a function that I want to emphasize because we often overlook it in all the many goals that our cultural heritage programs have. I think we need to remember that heritage programs can help increase critical capacity. We want members of a new generation to appreciate thinking. And that includes people who are out of school and people who have not had as much formal education. And we want heritage concerns, like food heritage concerns. We want them included in considerations as they think. Sometimes the steps are expressed as assessment, expression, and reform. Now, let us use a simple example to show how food history can create critical capacity and societal reform. Let us begin with self-assessment. How many of us this morning feel we are patriotic? Do we think that celebrating June 12th every year is important to building our personal sense of patriotism? If we do, how do we express our enthusiasm for June 12th? Display the Philippine flag at home, wear clothing with Philippine patterns and messages, play Philippine music, eat Philippine food? Okay, what do we want on our menu? If you say, and many people will say, pre-colonial food. Okay, what would pre-colonial food consist of? Wonderful. We already have rice or millet cakes wrapped in leaves. This is all, what I will mention, all comes from written evidence from 1521. But if you make those rice cakes, don't put cane sugar because there wasn't any. If anything, use honey because we had honey. You could also include in the pre-colonial menu coconut water, wine made of coconut, nipa, or rice, plain white rice, roast fish served with fresh raw ginger, pork, either roasted or in a broth. But what if one is like me, a vegetarian? Or what if one is hypertensive? Or what if one is a Muslim? Lechon cannot be on our menu. Now, do you think that will lessen our being Filipino? Or lessen our spirit of celebration? Okay. We can also have fish in broth. That was documented in 1521. That is the earliest written evidence of Filipino cuisine. Now, if you are thinking of sinigang, leave out the tomato because the ingredient had not yet been introduced into the Philippines. If you want to make fish tinola, don't put any squash or any unripe papaya for the same reason. Now let's say so many of the dishes you want to include were not enumerated. So let's say we want to expand our culinary options for June 12th by including anything that was cooked up to 1898. After all, that was the year of the proclamation of Philippine independence. Well, then we can have anything with tomato, such as arroz a la Valenciana. And there was, by the way, we have been forgetting, an arroz a la Filipina that was made in 1918. The recipe is there. We can also have pancit, turkey with truffles, marca piña ham, Philippine beer, adobo, Spanish wine, French champagne. There was sherbet, but there was no ice cream. And then you say, but what about all those wonderful ice creams that are being sold today? We want those ice creams for June 12th. That means that ice cream that is sherbet with milk mixed in. So we want to expand our menu possibilities into the American colonial era when there was ice cream. And it was during the American colonial era too, when the birthday cake arrived. So we can have a cake saying, happy 123rd birthday to the Philippine Republic, or happy 123rd anniversary of the Philippine Proclamation of Independence. Now you see what we have done is we are not just celebrating the pre-colonial, we are now celebrating with the accumulation of culinary accomplishments over 123 years. Now you say, well, okay, we've gone through assessment, we've gone through expression. What happens with reform? Okay, let's try this one. Think about this. Can we still improve or reform our sense of patriotism and how we express it on June 12th? Can we do a better job? Now, through food history research, I'm very happy that I have found the word naya-naya. It was rediscovered. It has fallen out of our vocabulary. Naya-naya comes out of Visayan, out of Cebu, Bohol, Negros, and Northern Mindanao. It means to entertain and to share with guests. It's polysemos, so it has a second meaning, which is to become a happy person. So in other words, we share food with others to make ourselves happy. Filipinos like to feed as much as we like to eat. Now, by doing naya-naya, we become naya-nayaon. And naya-nayaon means to become benign, to become quiet, to be at peace with the world. Naya-nayaon reminds of the Tagalog word, try to remember this one, tagim-tim. And Tagimtim has an old definition that you will not find on the web. It means the refreshing coolness, the coolness that comes after performing an act of kindness or having had a spiritual or religious experience. Now, Nayanaya is the closest native word I have found to hospitality. So I hope that some of you who are younger will be able to incorporate Nayanaya into the Filipino vocabulary. Nayanaya is also a culinary expression of pakikipagkapwa, of dealing person to person, relating through our deep inner sense of humanity. So if we want to activate Nayanaya on June 12, if we want to activate our pakikipagkapwa, what do? We can send food to our neighbors, send food to community pantries, we can send food to our heroic medical frontliners and the teams from our barangays and transportation and security. They risk for us. So as you can see, we have just gone through the experience of ourselves thinking of self-assessment, self-expression, and self-reform to deepen our understanding of being Filipino by the way we celebrate June 12th. It is as easy as that. Using intangibles needs to have a popular element that activates it, keeps it alive. May we have the last slide, please, Shirley? Now, societal improvement begins with individual enlightenment. Food history can be the spark for some of us to improve the future for mutual good. We don't want anyone to go hungry. Now, as heritage workers, we can support the growth of our country's critical capacity. We have just done it. We have taken something as simple as food, and we have started within ourselves to think a little bit more about it. Let us end, allow me to end, by reminding that when a generation's members find themselves thinking and agreeing on how to improve their personal well-being, like their food security, in similar ways, there is the possibility of societal transformation towards well-being for all. That is our goal of cultural heritage work. So I end by reminding, food history shows Filipinos transitioning to help each other. And that is the role for heritage work. Thank you all. I hope this made sense.
Thank you very much, Miss Feliz Santa Maria. That was very enlightening, and I think it's a wonderful reminder to all of us why we are doing heritage. Okay, that it starts with something that is inward, no, whether it's a spiritual, psychological, and emotional kind of an improvement or enhancement, or as Miss Feliz has said, enlightenment that works towards the societal well-being. That is, should be our heritage goal. So thank you very much for the beautiful lecture that you have given us. Okay, may we have now Professor Nick De Ocampo to tell us about film heritage. Okay, Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, Shirley, I will need you to help me in sharing my
PowerPoint?
My PowerPoint, please.
Okay, yes.
All right, thank you.
So let me just activate your PowerPoint.
Laptop right now, so. Okay. I will be speaking today on the endangered film heritage in the period of the pandemic. While we are setting it up, I will be, all right, there it is. So thank you. Maybe you can just enlarge. All right, thank you very much. So the period of the pandemic, maybe we can go to the second slide, please. Thank you. The period of the pandemic has brought an existential question to the film community. Using the language of a life-threatening crisis, we in the community ask, how does Philippine cinema survive its own unseen virus that has caused countless of its films to disappear? Is there a chance for cinema to continue its life and practice as it is? While the present pandemic, which the country and the world are experiencing, provides us with lessons to help preserve lives, we can only hope that the continuing epidemic waged against the country's film heritage can provide an opportune time to research on this popular culture, find its relevance as a cultural heritage, and preserve whatever is left of it. Second slide, please. Shirley, second slide, please. All right, thank you. Imbricated in our experience of the life-threatening health crisis is the all too familiar threat to the life of motion pictures. Like the virus that insidiously spreads to create havoc in our country and the world, the unseen film hand that causes countless Filipino films to deteriorate, decay, or face obsolescence has been around for a century. But for all the destruction it has caused, nothing substantial and systemic has been done to address the disappearing film legacy. In using the language of the pandemic to articulate the long-standing film problem of obsolescence and decay, this paper seeks to bring urgency to the problems faced by the endangered Filipino film heritage. In appraising our film heritage, how much do we really know about cinema and its place in our national culture? We may begin our quest by going back to the origins of motion pictures. During the year of our revolution against Spain, in the waning months of 1896, in the hands of Spanish entrepreneurs, film was a novelty item introduced to local society wrapped in all things European. Despite its Eurocentric traits, the story of how the alien film practice became native also reflects how we ourselves arrived at our identity as Filipinos. The motion picture's arrival in Manila from Europe in the same year when Andres Bonifacio broke allegiance from Spain by tearing up his cedula. Can we go to the next slide? The tearing up of his cedula may be seen to constitute the twin birth of cinema and national awakening. More historical coincidences reinforce the claim when nearly 2 days after Dr. Jose Rizal was shot at the Bagumbayan, the maiden public commercial exhibition of motion pictures was held at Numero 12 Interior Escolta, Manila, at an accessoria owned by Spanish photographer Senor Francisco Pertiera. It happened in the evening of January 1, 1897. Intertwined from the beginning, cinema and nation, both modern inventions, shared parallel histories that shaped Filipino identity. All right, can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. By 1898, the Philippines had its cinematic screen debut when George Dewey's naval triumph at the Battle of Manila Bay assured the depiction of Manila and the Philippines in America's early newsreels. In both sides of the Atlantic, in countries that first invented the mechanized motion pictures, the city and the colony found their first filmic representations. In France, Georges Méliès, the French film pioneer, shot a film about the historic event. His Combat Naval Devant Manille, naval combat near Manila, used toy ships filmed in a bathtub depicting what may have been an action-packed film. In New York City, on top of a building, two British filmmakers shot Battle of Manila Bay in an upturned tabletop filled with water, also using paper ships that were sold cheaply to celebrate Dewey's victory. Back in the Philippines in 1899, in an act of defiance against the colonizing Americans, Filipinos took up arms that resulted into the Philippine-American War. films made of America's first act of foreign invasion were shot to document America's victory and the Filipinos' valiant but futile struggle against their foreign invaders. Next slide. It is with cinema's past where we can find a place to investigate the role that cinema played in evolving our modern-day cultural heritage. Starting at its originary point, even if Spain left its colony, its cultural influences seeped deeper into the native culture and remained there, perhaps transformed, but efficacious in influencing the native cinema. Much of its influence can be visibly seen and experienced in the homegrown cinema we now call Filipino. Listen to the words we use when we converse about cinema. Cine, pelikula, telon, artista, taquilla, director, crítico, and almost every word we are accustomed to saying. Many of these are derived from Spanish. What about the films we make? Who can deny the Hispanic influence in the stories that flourished during the first 50 years of Tagalog cinema? They were mainly in the mold of the Spanish-appropriated zarzuela, starting with the first Filipino drama film in 1919, Dalagang Bukid. With this bequeathed cultural heritage, it cannot be denied how Filipino cinema can be sourced to a Hispanic past. During its maturity under US rule, Hollywood became cinema's master model. A new heritage formed. Interestingly, cinema's increasing maturity was in lockstep with the growing political maturity of the nation under the tutelage of its American mentor until its independence in 1946. The material progress that turned local cinema to become an advanced film industry in Asia brought with it influences that further shaped its identity. The commercial Hollywood model of movie making provided the industrial template for local film producers to imitate, despite the agricultural nature of our country's economy. What resulted was a copycat culture that, ironically, endeared film as a product of modernity and industrial technology, turning it into the Filipino national film culture in the country populated largely by farmers and peasants. Surprising things resulted from the blind values ascribed to the movies as they became instruments in nation building. Next slide. With the colonial, all right, as we go to the next slide, let me read this. With the colonial heritage inherited by the gentrified gatekeepers of the new nation, the elite capitalists in charge of the highly profitable entertainment economy not only continued, but replicated 1,000-fold the misplaced values of a culture that could have been used to develop a more genuine national culture and identity. Tied to the ambitions of the emerging nation state, specifically its elite culture leaders, the emerging Filipino nation could not escape film's colonial past and its capitalist aspirations. When we became a nation after the bitter battle against the Japanese occupation during World War II, it was when a path was paved for local film culture to mold its own Filipino identity. It was phenomenal to find that Tagalog cinema achieved its golden age barely a decade after the most devastating war to happen in the country. The films produced form a valuable cultural heritage that formed the classics of our national film culture. Films like those by Gerardo de Leon, Lamberto Avellana, and Manuel Conde. National artists were declared from the ranks of these filmmakers who made outstanding cinematic achievements. Our national heritage became palpable. Next slide, please. We are now in the period of martial law. But when martial law was declared in 1972, all right, as we go to the next slide, a grim episode defined film culture, providing another layer in our film heritage. Shirley, can we have the next slide? All right, thank you. Oh dear. And then the next slide again. We are now in martial law. Sorry, I missed that. All right, thank you. Under martial law, a grim episode defined film culture, providing another layer in our film heritage. It was a period of protest and counterculture against the misplaced values of an autocratic regime. From the crisis in culture emerged a culture of crisis, films that came in the form of protest. A new film heritage emerged heaped on top of its colonial past, this time compounded by dictatorship. The films that enriched our heritage were films of dissent, like those by Lino Broca, Ismael Bernal, Mike De Leon, Marilu Diaz Abaya, among others. One must not forget the emergence of the alternative cinema that stayed away from commercial cinema and formed a cinema of dissent by siding with the real people. More about this to be said later. Next slide, please. Sadly, once the military regime was over, it was back to a culture of commercialism and escapism, a return to nudity and toilet humor. Anything to make the movie industry survive a capitalist business. With the coming of the new millennium, a form of technological pandemic ravaged the movie industry it could not escape from. The analog format of movie making proved too much to bear against the onslaught made by digital technology. Until now, the local movie industry has yet to recover. When yet a real pandemic in the form of COVID-19 finally brought the local movie industry down on its knees. With the health pandemic shutting down all movie productions and the operation of movie theaters, what is to become of Philippine cinema? What is to happen to our national film heritage? It is in this dire condition that the local film community faces an existential question.
Sorry, Nick, you went mute.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
I think I pressed it. So I was asking the question, with the COVID-19 pandemic, what is to happen to our national film heritage? It is in this dark condition that the local film community faces an existential question. Will we be able to survive? We who are in the film community survive the odds that we are facing. With the epochal changes that happened in the past, cinema survived, but sadly, not the films that were made did, except for a meager few. Next slide. For all the material loss that remains incalculable, are added more woes if one were to be serious in investigating cinema as a cultural heritage. Can we go to the next slide? Foremost among this is the question of identity. Whose cinema is it? It is a question that has obsessed me as a film historian and has so far made me productive by coming up with several books on the subject. In those books, I have dealt with the substantial problems regarding identity. What are the film's sources, modes of production, culture, ideology, and other issues? As I go deeper into the problem of heritage, I wonder what it is that we are bequeathing to the next generation. Next slide. The popular mainstream Filipino cinema is the cinema we have traditionally considered to be our film patrimony. But is this all that we have to bequeath? In my new book that will be published by the UP Press this year, I deal with an other cinema that has been left unchronicled in official historical documents. There is a cinema that is missing from the country's film historiography. Nobody seemed to have bothered by this missing cultural artifact. This may not be surprising, as some may argue, it is a cinema that is ubiquitous anyway. It can be seen all around. However, and this is where the conundrum lies, its history is missing and systemically erased from public consciousness. Next slide. Resulting from 40 years of research, I have gathered enough data to show that there is another form of motion pictures I call alternative cinema. It forms the oldest and ironically also the most recent cinematic form. This cinema has been rendered invisible and divested of its legitimacy as an authentic cultural heritage. Much of the reason is because the movie industry has commanded a hegemonic dominance over our knowledge of local film culture and also the film history that was constructed. But with alternative cinema, we find a plethora of filmic forms and expressions that have not been included in what is considered to be the national cinema. And I want to refer to the different cinematic forms such as short film, documentary, experimental, animation, student film, regional film, and many more. Each is a distinct cinematic expression. Cinema of alternative forms need to be redeemed for their cultural value. It is hoped that they will be reinstalled as part of our cultural heritage. With their reinscription in our national culture, the monolithic hegemony cast by industrial cinema will be defied by the multiplicity of filmic organizations resulting from this cinema that thrives in fragmentation. More significantly, the monumental notion of national cinema, in quotes, will be challenged by the idea of a cinema that was already and is always a multiplicity. This multiplicity gives the cinema a more democratic claim by recognizing a wider linguistic, ethnic, and geographic spread as it recognizes films made by ordinary people from all parts of the archipelago and not only from the capital, Manila. The significant impact of the idea recasts the notion of motion pictures, rather recasts how our notion of motion pictures are to be regarded as our national heritage. Next slide. My research shifts away from the traditional method of seeing the history of cinema from the industrial entertainment with the perspective towards a polyphonic collection of film forms. The traditional mainstream cinema has only resulted to a linear and plotted development of history, a kind of history that may be described in the words of two French philosophers, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, as arborescent. Genealogical in its singular chronology of cinematic growth, it defines a film culture that is monolithic in believing that only films of industrial provenance have the legitimate right to be recognized and therefore be consecrated to history. But in bringing alternative films into the open and into the public consciousness, we can fulfill the full potentials of motion pictures. It is to Deleuze and Guattari's theory of the rhizome that I owe this new perspective in looking at Philippine film heritage. I took from it the inspiration of finding a paradigm that could address the complex underground network of films made outside the mainstream movie industry. A rhizomatic perspective.
Nick, sorry, you went
again.
mute again.
Yes. I took from the theory of the rhizome the inspiration of finding a paradigm that could address the complex underground network of films made outside the mainstream movie industry. This rhizomatic perspective takes a look at an expansive film growth not bound by any one source. Likened to a true rhizomatic growth that has free, expansive movements constantly connecting in random and in infinite points, alternative films develop with the freedom to be produced by anyone, anytime, anywhere, and at whatever cost. It is an emancipative cinema. This has been made more possible in the period of the digital technology, where cinema splinters into countless linearities, each providing an evidence of cinema's multiple manifestations. These ideas that sound heretical to mainstream film scholars and traditional heritage advocates are my response to what the new century has brought us in terms of looking at our so-called traditional cultures. Challenged by this conference to think of, and I quote, innovative theories to study our past, as well as to seek, and quote again, new directions in order to rethink heritage preservation and practices and construct new histories, I introduced the rhizome paradigm to shatter the traditional historiography of the old industrial cinema and emancipate motion pictures to assume a more democratic approach to arrive at what we may finally claim to be a people's cinema. By opening ourselves up to new theories and devising new paradigms, we can expand our consciousness and continue to evolve in our culture and enrich our heritage. Lastly, let me talk about what epistemic crisis, next slide please. Shall we go to the next slide? All right, so I just talked about this crisis and then we can go to the next slide so I can finish on time. All right. Let me talk about what epistemic crisis results from our crisis of in film heritage. Many of our films are missing, but more than that, may I refer here to our concept of what is national cinema and who is imagining the nation and with what means. Of what epistemic relevance has the mode of filmic production made to our conception of national cinema? In problematizing our national cinema as a patrimony that we can bequeath to the next generation, we need to know what films are these that we have inherited and now bestow as our legacy. My research on alternative cinema has given me insights on what better legacy we can hand over to the next generation. With films made outside the movie industry, those made by real people, this gives us hope that the films we make are products of an authentic experience and not by some paid professional but contrived imagination. This brings us to the question of how national truly is Filipino cinema when the imagination that is shaped by the movies is a product of a commercial enterprise financed and approved by elite capitalists, whose imagination rules the movies we watch. Second to the last slide. Okay. Contributing to the ethnography of Philippine cinema, alternative cinema has a legitimate claim to being a people's cinema. The films produced are those coming from the wellspring of ordinary people's needs to make films, not from professional sector whose desires are molded by commercial demands, populist expectations, or by state control. Alternative films are direct expressions of common people's thoughts and experiences. As records of the actual living conditions and the creative imaginations of ordinary people, they provide us living historical documents. In watching them, they demand a different consciousness and a repositioning of beliefs and attitudes in relation to the subjects they capture. Finally, last slide. I therefore end this talk with a call to action. As heritage is a living, dynamic force, so should we heritage advocates ought to be dynamic and assertive in attaining a heritage that Filipinos rightly deserve to have. In regarding the country's popular culture, cinema, let us rethink about this culture that has for a century dominated our notion of what is Filipino national cinema. While we value the movies that have been popularly consumed by mass audiences, and believe me, I am one, I love to watch those movies, I also make an appeal that we open up our minds, be guided by the researches we make of this culture, and adapt to new ways of thinking and constructing of new cinematic opportunities for other cultural forms to coexist. And that's all I'm asking, to coexist and provide options as part of our living culture. This way we can achieve a more emancipative heritage as we bequeath what rightly deserved culture we have to the next generation. So with that, I thank you for this opportunity to make a presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nick De Ocampo, for that for all the marvelous work that you have done on film research studies. Okay, you are an intellectual, a Filipino intellectual on film. Okay, and we appreciate all those marvelous work you have done, and thank you for giving us this kind of an extensive and exciting suite of film of the film heritage in our country. Thank you. Shall we have the lecture of Dr. Ferilio Petronilo Demeterio III? Dr. Yum, are you online? Would you like to deliver your presentation instead?
I'm here, Dr. Shirley, straight from the health center.
Okay, so you're already vaccinated. Okay, great. So may we welcome Dr. Ferrilio Petronilo Demeterio III to deliver his presentation. Thank you very much. Dr. Yum, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I prepared a recording, but it seems that there's a technical problem. So I will do my live presentation. Just a moment. My laptop is still loading. Sorry. Sorry for the delay.
That's okay, Dr. Yum. We have sufficient time.
So I think you can already see my presentation.
Yes, we can see your screen. Go ahead, please. We can see your screen. Thank you.
Okay, so I can see my screen. You can see my screen. Okay, I can start with my presentation now. So the title of my talk is A Diachronic Analysis of the Facades of the Filipino-Spanish Churches of the Diocese of Maasin in the context of the Moro raids. The preliminary paper that I'm going to share today is a spin-off from our NCCA-funded project that was intended to baseline and catalog the 7 Filipino-Spanish heritage churches of the Diocese of Maasin on the island of Leyte. With me in the project are 2 collaborators from the Visayas State University, Dr. Geraldo Fernandez and Dr. Leslie Ann Liwanag. Our research and book output and 2 other article output were intended to raise the consciousness of the people in that area about the cultural treasures in their possessions, and hopefully put a stop on the creeping renovations and improvements that spawn irreversible damage on the heritage structures. So these are the locations of the 7 heritage churches relative to the Philippine fault line that bisected Leyte, and 22 active and dormant volcanoes of Leyte. So we have so many volcanoes, and some of these volcanoes dormant. The dormant ones at least are giving us at least the famous geothermal energy of the island of Leyte. In our original paper, when we mapped the locations and orientations of the 7 heritage churches, we noticed that none of them was oriented. The closest one in terms of orientation is Maasin Cathedral, but its altar is actually located in the west end instead of the east end. So it is therefore occidental, if there is such a word, not strictly speaking oriented. The altar should be the one facing the east. So the church will have an east-west orientation, but the altar should be the one located at the east. But in the case of Maasin, the altar is located at the west, the Cathedral of Maasin. Instead of orientation, the builders of these churches were more interested in aligning their structures either parallel or perpendicular to the nearest shoreline. All of these churches are actually near the shoreline. This location and alignment to the shoreline underscore the importance of the sea, both to the early missionaries and inhabitants of the early pueblos in Leyte. The areas occupied by the 7 heritage churches were evangelized from either Dulag or Carigara by the Jesuits. The first Jesuit missions were located there, and eventually it was located in Hilongos. One of the churches is actually a Jesuit house. And the mountain ranges and forests of Leyte prevented the early Leyteños to travel by land. So when they go from one pueblo to another, they will usually use the sea as the means of travel. But the establishment of the pueblos and the Christianization of the early Liteños created a new problem. Once their new pueblos became bigger establishments and presumably more economically well-off, this became targets of the Moro raids. So you will see the map here of the routes of the Moro raiders rather. So some will exit Mindanao through Iligan Bay. So there's a river, there's a huge river system here, and the Maguindanaos and the Maranaos and the Iranons will exit here in this area here, and Leyte is very near. Some will travel around the Zamboanga Peninsula. Because the natives were Christianized, pacified, and disarmed, they could not effectively fend off these raids or undertake raids themselves. So we have to remember that raiding was a way of life among pre-Hispanic Filipinos. So once the Visayans, the lowland Visayans were Christianized, they were actually prevented from undertaking these raids. So raiding was no longer a meaningful activity for them. This paper in progress that I'm sharing today looks into how the church facade, the church facade designs responded to the waxing and waning of the Moro raids along the coastline of Leyte. Through archival research, site visits, and extrapolations, we were able to date the constructions of the 7 heritage churches of the Diocese of Maasin. So these are this is the timeline that we have. The Jesuit missionaries first evangelized Leyte. Then when they were expelled, the Augustinians took over, then the Franciscans and the seculars, and then later on the seculars. So the area was under the Diocese of Manila before, then the Diocese of Cebu, then the Diocese of Calbayog, Diocese of Palo, and finally the Diocese of Maasin. So this is the southern part of Leyte. So the whole of southern Leyte and 7 towns of Leyte province. So we were able to date, these are the dates. The Punta Chapel is 1634 to 1650. Hilongos Church, which was a Jesuit house, 1710 to 1754. Maasin Cathedral, 1771, 1780. Baybay Church, 1852. Malitbog Church, 1854. Matalom Church, 1863, 1884. And San Juan Church, 1892. So these are the dates of the church. So successive of this church were not built simultaneously created an opportunity for us to study the evolution, so to say, the evolution of the facade designs. So this is a closer look at the same timeline that I presented a while ago. So in 1634, there was this Moro raid that destroyed the Baybay Pueblo, the original Baybay Pueblo, and forced the inhabitants of this pueblo to transfer to Barangay Punta, a southern barangay from the south of the present pueblo or the present poblacion of Baybay City. Then in 1754, this is a famous year for Moro raids. Several of the towns, several of the islands in the archipelago were actually raided by several bands of raiders, Moro raiders. So this destroyed Maasin Pueblo and San Juan Pueblo, and the Hilongos Church was attacked, and the Palompon Church also was famously attacked by, it was under siege actually for several days until finally the Moro raiders gave up. So the people of Palompon were saved actually by their fortified church. Sometime in 1780s, the Spaniards shifted their naval strategy. Instead of using Spanish-designed boats, they started using Moro-designed boats and mounted these with more powerful guns. So relative to the Moro firepower, the Spanish firepower was more powerful, and this shifted the power alignment or the power relations in the Visayan seas, at least, or in the Philippine seas. Okay, so instead of the Moro raiders having the swifter vessels, the Spaniards now with their Moro boats and Spanish or European firepower, they became more superior. They're now capable of chasing the Moro raiders. So in our ongoing paper, we call these churches the Moro raids period churches. And we have three: the Punta Chapel, the Hilongos Church, and the Maasin Cathedral. And then we called these churches the post-Moro raid period churches. And we have Baybay Church, Malitbog Church, Matalom Church, and San Juan Church. The Moro raids period and the post-Moro raids period shaped four types of facade designs in the Diocese of Maasin. And these are the Visita facade, Moro raids period Visita facade. And we have the Fortress Romanesque facade, Moro raids period. And then we have the Romanesque neoclassical facade, early post-Moro raids period. And then finally, we have the Romanesque Baroque facade, late post-Moro raids period. Punta Chapel used to be a Pueblo church. After Baybay Pueblo was sacked by a raiding party under Sultan Kudarat. This is 1634 raid, and this forced the Pueblo to transfer to a hill. This is now the Barangay Punta, the present Barangay Punta. We noticed that its original masonry was just a perimeter skirt. We deduced that its upper half was originally composed of lighter materials, such as wood, bamboo, or the tabique pampango, or the famous wattle and daub, the Philippine wattle and daub. Punta Chapel is located near the shoreline, but on an elevated landmass. Its location offers a good vantage point in detecting approaching Moro vessels. The lightness of its construction could have been meant for it to be abandoned during attacks and just repaired afterwards. So only the perimeter skirt will remain, and then they will just put up another structure on top of this perimeter skirt, masonry skirt. Hilongos Church and Maasin Cathedral were the structures with fortress Romanesque facade. The old San Juan Church, this is Kabalian, so this is a very curious church, San Juan Church. Behind it is the Kabalian volcano, and in front it is the Philippine fault line, so very delicate, in a very vulnerable church. And the old church was demolished in 1890s, and we guessed, or we hypothesized that it was a fortress Romanesque church facade. It had a Romanesque facade, fortress. Certainly it was a fortified church. So we're not certain whether the facade was part of the fortification, but we are sure that it was a fortified church because the documents will tell us that it was a fortified church. So this is the Hilongos Church. So this is the old facade of the Hilongos Church. So the old facade is facing the shoreline, and they actually created a new nave, and it became, so this is the old facade is here, and they in 1960s they created a new nave, practically a new nave, and the new facade is here. But it is a fortified church, and its facade is part of the fortification. The main entrance is part of the gate. The fortress Romanesque facade is characterized. This is Maasin Cathedral, and you will see its fortification. A huge portion of its fortification is gone, but we have existing segments of the fortification here, and then there's an old watchtower here. So I think the original one had 4 watchtowers here, here, and here, but now only one watchtower remains, but probably there is another one here, and we're not really very sure because this is covered by buildings now, but the facade is the fortification is still there. Romanesque architecture is being part of the fortification. The facade is part of the fortification, and it's also characterized by being impenetrable, as well as by its defensive bell towers. So the bell towers are part of the defense system. It cannot be scaled easily. The openings of the bell towers are way, way up there. So it's very difficult to scale this bell tower. Romanesque architecture is supposed to be an early medieval style. Its presence in 18th century Philippines could be a product of its simplicity, as well as of the limitations imposed by the construction materials used at the time, which is rubble and mortar. So I have to clarify, I think I'm not very sure about the other churches, but in the Visayan churches, at least in this Maasin churches, the main material is not coral stones. The coral stones there are just claddings. They are not stone blocks. They are more like tiles than stone blocks. The main masonry is composed of mortar and rubble. So it's formless actually. It's a mass of mortar and rubble, and the cut stones are just tile claddings, so to say. These are Baybay Church and Malitbog Church are structures with Romanesque neoclassical facade. So we're now in the post-Moro raids period, and you will notice that they have more elaborate facades that are easily penetrable. Their bell towers are no longer designed to be defense systems. In fact, the entrance to their bell towers are no longer from the inside of the church, but their bell towers are accessible from the outside. And you will notice here, suddenly you have a Gothic structure, but this Gothic structure is not made of masonry. It's made of wood covered with galvanized iron sheets. Very delicate, actually. This is very delicate, very beautiful, but very delicate also. I will argue later on that I don't think we have a real Gothic design in the Philippines, but at least in the Diocese of Maasin, we don't have a real Gothic transition from neo-Romanesque to Gothic. We don't have that interval in our churches, at least in our 7 churches. Their builders' energy and creativity that were previously used to make the structure impenetrable were now used to beautify the facades of these churches. They are now more elaborate, more delicate facades. They are no longer intended as defense systems. Then the Baroque period, Romanesque Baroque. I will call it Romanesque Baroque. Matalam Church and the 1892 San Juan Church are structures with Romanesque Baroque facade. So we can see here how the rigid geometry of the Romanesque neoclassical facade were abandoned in favor of the more playful and energetic curving lines. So I'm showing here Kabalian Church with its old wooden bell tower. And this wooden bell tower was destroyed in 1980s by a very powerful typhoon. And suddenly they made this incongruent, very modern, ultra-modern bell tower. So it will not actually match with the Baroque design of the facade of the San Juan Church. The Romanesque aspect of the neoclassical and Baroque facade designs remained in the sense that the interiors of these post-Moro raids period structures were still dark, and its load-bearing walls were still squat and massive. Romanesque style remained the defining features of this facade. The Filipino-Spanish churches did not have a Gothic interval in the sense that our soft coral stones and earthquake-prone locations. In the case of the Luzon churches, I think we're using adobe stones, volcanic stones, and these are actually very soft. I think they could not sustain. They could not support the soaring Gothic style. And of course, you have this earthquake-prone locations, and you especially in Leyte, when the Philippine fault line is there at the middle, right there at the middle of Leyte. It's impossible. I think it's impossible to create a Gothic church composed of pure masonry and lime. Filipinos find the cool and dark Romanesque interiors more conducive to prayer and meditation. And if you live in a country that is warm and a country that explodes with natural colors, who would like to be in a Gothic interior anyway? Our neoclassical style emerged directly from the Romanesque style, probably without the bewildering measurements and proportions of the Gothic interval. Our neoclassical style was not obsessed with rigid measurements and proportions. Not all earthquake-proof Filipino-Spanish churches are Baroque. Even the ones that are supposedly Baroque can be Baroque only, maybe in the facade or in the interior. I think San Agustin is a famous Baroque church, but I think the exterior of San Agustin, I think you will see the Romanesque and neoclassical still there. I think the Baroqueness of San Agustin will be encountered in the interior of that church. So thank you very much. I will stop my sharing.
Thank you very much for sorry. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Yung, for that lovely presentation on the churches. Okay. And congratulations for those wonderful research work that you have done, you and your team. Okay. Right now, we are going to have our open forum. Okay. So may we ask the panelists to turn on their camera so that the audience can see you. Okay. And then we would like the audience to express their questions. So there will be an interaction, so we can see the interaction here. So when I call your name, because some of you already posted your questions in the boxes, okay, when I call your name, can you please click the raise hand and will allow you to speak up. Okay, so I think we can start with Jose Victor Torres. Okay, he has already raised his hand. Vic, can you share your question, please?
Yeah, good morning to the panelists, and I'm sure that some of you already know me. We've been working together. I'm from the De La Salle University History Department. I have some questions, and I think just for the brevity of time, I'm going to present all of these questions, so the panel has the leisure of answering it. For Dr. Cerudo, considering that the conservation plan was made for the UST main building, I mean, I saw when Clarice was doing this, Clarice Avendaño was doing this conservation plan, and for the conservation plans of the other heritage buildings, I've been wondering, through these years, how many of it have been actually enforced or done by the owners concerned with regards to the building, especially with in this case with the UST main building. I'm aware that may dalawang poste yata doon na malaking biyak doon sa UST main building. I'm not sure if it has already been repaired or something has been done about it. And how much of this have been followed, considering that the problems of funding and the problems of modernization are still ongoing. We are familiar, of course, with what's happening to San Sebastian Church right now. Okay. For Ma'am Felice, my question with regards to food research, world research on food has created a large awareness on the discovery of new edible plants all over the world that had become promising as food substitutes or in addition to more nutrition and everything. But is this being done in the Philippines right now? So far, because I've been encountering in other places in Africa, China, and everything, but I seldom see anything on the Philippines. I don't know if the plant species are still existing because of what is happening throughout the years. And should you think that this kind of research be incredibly funded? I'm using the word incredibly, so at least to provide a solution to the food crisis that we have now, and the fact that we are largely dependent on export products as ingredients for our food. For Sir Nick, considering the deterioration of our films by climate conditions, and has there any been new discoveries on how to preserve, aside from just merely placing them in a good environment to preserve the film? I think you're very, very familiar with what's happening to some of the old films. And another question is the problem of marketing the art films, because we're aware of the incident that happened, I think, in one of the big malls, where an art film that was presented lasted only, I think, one day. The next day, it was removed from the movie list because wala daw audience, and everything. Should the present alternative cinema still include a behind the scene producer na medyo mag-finance, and at the same time try to convince cinema owners, mall owners to put up this kind of films. No? So yun lamang po muna at I hope that you can at least provide me with some insights on what is happening today in our present heritage. And sorry, kay Dr. Yung pala, I totally forgot to Dr. Yung. We've been studying, of course, the earthquake-proof churches, no? And how they have lasted throughout the years. Pero with what happened in Typhoon Ondoy, when they were literally blown down by typhoons, no? So should new researches should be done with regards to the sturdiness of some of these churches by not just concentrating on earthquakes, but on actual climate and weather conditions that may weaken the structures through the years. Yun lamang po at salamat po sa inyong pag-share sa pagsagot sa aking mga questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Victorres. So may we have the panelists respond to those questions raised by Sir Vic. Eric, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vic, for that question. I'm sure Vic knows the UST main building by the palm of his hands for having stayed there for quite a while. I think everybody should disabuse themselves of the idea with regards to CMP. CMP is not an immediate palliative to all your problems. CMP is really a study. It's a confluence of the significance. And syempre, you have to consider the changes forthcoming that will impact on a particular architectural site. So the CMP is required by law, but we don't know exactly if all the people follow in putting together a sound and robust CMP. Okay, what I'm trying to tell you is this: if we're going to maybe appropriate or adopt Felice's critical capacity, then maybe, just maybe, our national agencies, our academic community will be better off in putting a very good and robust conservation siguro milieu, no? Regalado Trotause really advocates severe documentation and research, because the moment you ground yourself, you have a better appreciation of the things that you will do, then more or less this will give you a better way to navigate and translate yourself into the future. Okay, Vic, I think that's my only answer now, because I think that's the best for now, that I can give to you. I think Felice, I'll give the floor to Felice now.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, a lot of critical thinking is needed on different levels, followed up by action. Vic, indeed, you have pointed out a very important usefulness for food history. Just let me quickly get this across before I answer you directly, because I think some of our audience may not be aware of the very active work I've been doing on food history, and my IG posts have been tracking food history from pre-colonial all the way, we're now in the 2nd century, by the way. But just so you know, because I think this parallels the architectural history and parallels some of Nick's work in cinematography, the highlights of cinematography. In food, we have one period, which is from Legazpi up to the end of the Conquista, which is 1750. It took 150 years, more or less, for us to become, quote, Christianized and peaceful, for us to have at least 1 million converts, okay? There is a food story of that. It is a Christianization of Philippine food. Then we go from 1751 to 1815, the end of the Galleon era, which is again a secularization and a feeling that this galleon trade is not working. So there were economic reforms attempted. Then the 4th, from the galleon trade end, 1816 to 1898. And just as Nick was pointing out, that we went into this period of trying to prove who we were in food. We also stood our food side by side with any of the most sophisticated examples of urbanismo food. We put ourselves up on the same level. Do not forget that. Do not look down. Do not say that we were just trying to be foreign. No, we were putting ourselves equal. Look at it from that point of view. And from the start of the 20th century up to 1946, that is the introduction of the modernist thinking towards food. So you will see that parallel also in cinematography. Anyway, during all those periods, there was extensive research, as I'm sure Vic knows, done by missionaries and scientists and food people in the food realm on what we could eat from the wildness. And up to 1922, I have published again material about that. Up to 1922, much of our wild food was still available. The good thing, Vic, is that I have looked at some of the more recent studies by young food scientists. And the good thing is they look into the history of these foods that they want to perpetuate in our current food agriculture. There is not enough research. That is why I am appealing if there are people who could please look into food history. I've mentioned different fields. I'm sure one of them must interest you. And we are hoping, just to end quickly, I hope that's the only question people will ask of me, is that we're looking forward to the confluence of the Department of Agriculture, the NCCA, the Philippine Culinary Heritage Movement, and the Slow Food Movement through Filipino Food Month. Maybe, this will help us look at good and important food, not only to create for the export market, Vic, but to feed ourselves. We need to be eating lower on the food chain. We need to be aware of current dietary reasons to keep us from mentally going crazy, from going angry, so that our students will learn better. We don't have hyperactive people. You see, I speak in a very popular manner, but trust me, this is all science-based. So Vic, I'm with you all the way, and I hope that our colleagues out there listening will attend to food in a more intellectual approach there, a more intellectual approach. So that's the end of my talk. Who's next? Nick.
Thank you.
You're
Nick.
next.
Yeah.
Please go next.
So Feliz, as I eat my lunch today, I'll try to have an intellectual approach to what I'm gonna eat, and at the same time try to periodize and historicize exactly every piece of food that I will have. Now, to answer Professor Torres's question, I think they're very much related to each other. So I'll have one answer. It's not a simple one, but I think I can respond to this with without being technological, without resorting to technological determinism, because I am giving you my response that the digital technology right now is epochal. The digital technology, little did we think about it. Towards the end of the 20th century, we were really going into a severe crisis in the celluloid analog cinema. All right, we could not preserve them. All right, it's very hard. Safety film was made in the 50s, etc., to salvage the film. But somewhere along the way, with the spark of the digital technology, now we can digitize our films. And they look really like the original now. I mean, it keeps on evolving and improving. And now it is really amazing that far beyond than what we are doing here in the Philippines, especially in Scandinavian countries, in Europe, in the States, of course, they are really able to preserve their film heritage. We envy them, and we are doing our best to bring the technology here to us. So one way, sir, to answer your this unmitigated deterioration and obsolescence and everything else, I think technology has a solution to it, and digitalization is in. However, this is the problem. The shelf life of some of these technologies are quite brief and fast. So we keep on changing them again and again, but for the better. Here's my thing, but for the better. Again, for so-called developing countries like the Philippines, can we afford them? So there are problems that are accompanying every technological advancement that can salvage our film patrimony. There are costs to be paid. Now, to the question of distribution, again, digital technology came to the rescue. Yes, people have been asking towards the end of the century that where can we find a decent Lino Brocka film? Where can we find Nick de Ocampos documentaries? Where can we find Kidlat Tahimix? I mean, he's a national artist, he's celebrated abroad. We can't find anything. Now the digital platforms are flourishing. Sadly, however, my problem is as I try to survey my students, now that everything is available out there, including the classics, the French classics, the American classics, and all that, are they expressing interest in watching them now that these are available? I mean, that's another topic, of course. But anyway, just to answer your question and to be brief about it, because there are other, I am expecting a question that is going to sizzle in a little while. All right. I just end this issue now by saying that, again, without resorting to a full faith that technological determinism is going to solve all our problems, however, technology can be on our side. Thank you.
With the question of Dr. Vic, first, I think he was referring to Yolanda, not Undoy. We were not affected by Undoy in Leyte. And the southern churches of Leyte were not really damaged by Yolanda. And especially these churches that we have in the Diocese of Maasin, these are covered by the Cordillera, the Cordillera of Leyte. So these are covered by, from the Pacific storms, coming from the Pacific, the winds from the Pacific. We have this, this barrier, the mountainous barrier of Cordillera de Leyte. And we're safe. So the only church exposed actually is Kabalian and a little, Malitbog, a little. So we alerted the diocese about this possibility that these two churches are exposed from the Pacific winds, the others are not. But we also alerted the diocese of the need for maintenance. I think the design of the roofing system are okay. What they need is maintenance so that it will not be unhinged. And we have a pending proposal for funding by the Augustinian friars to document the ceiling of the Maasin Cathedral, because if something will happen to the roof, then the ceiling will be the one. I think it will be the one that it will be severely damaged. It's made of galvanized iron sheets, so not as delicate as the ones in Bohol. But once something will happen to the roof, then it's the delicate painting that will be damaged. So what I want to say is that it's really maintenance is important, and I think the design, it withstood so many storms before. The only church in that area in the upper part, I think is Giwan, that was damaged by Yolanda. Palo Cathedral is no longer Filipino-Spanish. It was I think it was post-war. The structure of Palo Cathedral is post-war, so they destroyed. I think they destroyed the old, because after the war there were still photographs of the Palo Cathedral during the war rather, but after the war they destroyed the whole cathedral, and what was destroyed by Yolanda was a post-war architecture, actually, the roofing system. I hope I was able to answer Dr. Vic your concern. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have questions from Randy Nobleza, and Randy is asking me to read his questions, okay? So there are three here. The first one is for Eric, Dr. Zerudo. Randy Nobleza hails from Marinduque, okay? So greetings from Marinduque. Any recommendations for NCCA's cultural mapping and pre-CAP harmonization? How do we move forward after having a local culture profile and cultural inventory? Okay. May I read his question for Madam Santa Maria? You mentioned regarding UNESCO Creative Cities, any lead for a gastronomic city in the Philippines? Okay. And then for Dr. Demeterio, Randy is asking, saan po available ang mga libro ninyo sa mga simbahan ng Leyte? Para maging modelo namin dito sa Marinduque, na favorite din ang manggagayaw na salakayin. Okay. So may we have Eric first? Thank you.
Yes, Shirley. Maybe just an addendum to Dr. Demeterio's discussion. In 2015, a year after the onslaught of Yolanda, we had a World Bank project with regards to the vulnerability assessment of the churches in Bohol and also Giwan. So this was a World Bank project, and our partner there was actually De La Salle University. So at the forefront of many of these heritage engineering, particularly on vulnerabilities, is the College of Engineering of De La Salle. No? And we are very glad that, in fact, Dr. Gigi is very open to all of these studies. And it's quite interesting because the study was, it's like a trinity. So the equations delve on earthquakes, the equations delved on the uplift of the roof, so wind, and also the flooding. So the whole report is now with World Bank, and there's a copy at the NCCA. So I think if this will help eventually in the study of Dr. Demeterio, then it's a very good reference. It's quite technical, so it takes a lot. Now for Dr. Randy, I'd like to extend my regards to him, but it's quite interesting, no, with cultural mapping happening. I remember Felice asked me to do that in the early 90s. To map out what's happening in a particular community. I really didn't understand what she's trying to do for all of us. But now it has become a law. It is under the Public Act 10066. It is required under the National Local Government Code. It's extremely important. But this is one thing that I have to caution everybody with regards to mapping. The way we envisioned mapping was really to incite the curiosity of the community on how to discover their strengths, their histories. Now, you do not do mapping that is for compliance, that is mechanical, because it's required by government. I think that has to be cleared. You do your mapping because you would like to utilize it in your everyday. That is most important. So I would really caution you not to standardize mapping. Don't harmonize it. You define your mapping givens depending on how you will use it eventually. So if the national government requires you to have your mapping, well and good. Maybe they have something used for that, maybe for a pre-cook or whatever. But at the end of the day, please remember, how will you use your data? How will you translate and transform lives because of your data? Because at the end, how will you use all of these intangibles, all of your built heritages, all of this so that it will be meaningful to the lives of the people? No, there are so many trajectories. It can be for education, it can be for tourism, it can be for infrastructure, it can be for investment, whatever you want. And this will be very, very helpful to the local government. That's when you'll be able to impress the value of heritage to policy making. That's when our local government will see this significance of heritage in the lives and transformation of their communities. Okay, so that's it for my piece. It's your turn, Felice.
Thank you, Eric. We go back such a long way. All of us here on this panel. Oh my heavens, trying to awaken first love, awareness, and then affection for, and now sustainability. In terms of gastronomic city, I'm afraid we are very far away from any such designation. I may be wrong, but You know, you don't just get it because you have nice food or because you think your food is good. No, any of these international designations, gastronomic city, creative city, there are many. All of these, as I have been trying to point out, depend on how you want to use this designation to improve the betterment of the lives of the people who are going to be at the basis, the foundational neighborhoods for all of this. And secondly, as Eric has been pointing out, and as we have seen, for instance, with the documentation of the churches in Leyte, if we do not have the proper full recording, we do not track our history backwards and forwards, and show the patterns that our history have shown, where we have been good to ourselves, where we have triumphed, and how our food has triumphed, shown that spirit of the people, we're not going to get any designation. The documentation is fundamental. That's all I can say. No creative city, no gastronomic city without the documentation. Just read. You who are interested, you look up the UNESCO sites. Most of us on this panel have UNESCO work in our DNA. Once you're there, you cannot get rid of it. Trust me. But read it yourself. Then you will understand what we need to do as a country to get any designation. That's end of my little talk. Read it for yourself, then you will understand. Who's next?
I think I will answer.
Dr. Yung, yes, please, go ahead.
Our book, Randy, is out of print, but the Augustinian Friars of Cebu will publish the second edition of the book. So we're just waiting for the second publication by the Augustinian Friars of Cebu. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think Randy has a reply to Eric, saying that they are building on your work in Marinduque, and they're building some heritage districts in Boa, Mogpog, and Gasan. So thank you, Eric, for your inspiration. Okay, and thank you, Ms. Santa Maria, Madame Feliz, for your for also your inspiring answer. Okay, now I think we have the next question from Fidel Bendadillo. He asked me to read his question. It's for you, Nick, and then after that we'll have Dina Roma. Okay, so Fidel Bendadillo asked, how can we value our film as heritage if the depiction of the film is disrespectful to known individuals and against government programs? Nick, go ahead.
I really would like to see your face on the screen, Fidel. I'm sure your question is well-meaning, but please decouple exactly being disrespectful and being critical. I think we need to be very clear about that, all right? Where was I being disrespectful? May I read to you again? And maybe you can even replay this recording that we did earlier when I talked about what you said as the named directors, all right? I mentioned they produced a valuable cultural heritage. Is that being disrespectful when I talked about Gerardo de Leon, Lamberto Avellana, and Manuel Conde? Then one paragraph after, when I talked about the martial law directors, I mentioned mentioned that these filmmakers, Broca, Bernal, and De Leon, Marilu Diaz-Abaya, enriched our film heritage. So I don't know where the disrespect comes in. However, I will agree to you that there is something in what I said, and I tested exactly this conference. It was my coming out party, mainly because this conference has a very interesting part which I think challenged all of us. While all of you were talking, and you cannot but help talk about the traditional architecture we have and food and everything, make a difference with film. Because film right now, you know, is still continuing. It's barely 100 years old. It is still evolving. And what, as a historian who has written for books already on this, I have seen there are a lot of oppressions, injustices that go on in our cultural heritage. And mainly I am talking here about the marginalized cinematic forms that are not written in our canonical historiography. It is all about the long feature films. But do you know that the first film that was made was a short film in 1918? It was not even shot in the Imperial Manila, but rather in Cebu by Jose Nepomuceno, who has been misrecognized and misplaced in our history by saying exactly that he started Philippine cinema in 1919 with Dalagang Bukid, a feature-length film. I understand why our past historians were doing that. It really favors the industrial movie industry, which is a long feature, dramatic film, drama, Start, Atang de la Rama, and all that. But did you know, if we research, this is the beauty of cultural research. I went to San Carlos University, read Spanish newspapers, La Fuerza, La Nueva Fuerza, and there, lo and behold, 1918, January 7, somebody made a film on the burial of Doña Estefania, viuda de Osmeña, the wife of Sergio Osmeña. Somebody made a film. I triangulated the information, went to the Sun. After so many years of chasing him, I found him in Tagaytay, and Luis Nepomuceno, the only living son of Don Jose, on my video, 3 times I made him say this. He said that his father made that film in 1918. All right, plus the documents, the Spanish documents that I have from the University of San Carlos. I just moved the hand of history, the clock, 1 year earlier. So it's a short film, therefore we don't write it down. It's not included. But let me tell you that it was an uncut history from 1918 all the way to the digital short films. The first films made in the digital era were short films again. The first films that Mike De Leon did was a short film. Name it, Kidlat Tahimik, all of this. All right, so having said that, there is a lot of marginalization that I want to bring out into the open. A cinema that is much older than what we consider to be our national cinema. Now, I am ideological. I am not going to be apologetic about it. I had been an advocate of this since the time I studied and wrote my first book, which was about short films. We cannot forever put aside marginal films from the very definition of what national cinema is. Because films about the revolution, films during martial law, films about prostitution, about factory workers and everything else, not to mention the experimental films and artistic films. So there's much to learn about this unwritten chronicle of cinema in the Philippines. Before I go into more advocacies and everything and discussion, I will just place it there. All I'm saying, sir, Mr. Fidel, is that there are other forms of cinema that have really been minoritized by our so-called majoritarian, hegemonic, industrial films that you must realize this kind of a history and mode of production, and therefore the kind of reception that we have that elevated this to our national cultural consciousness, it was really determined by our colonial experience. It was an industrial capitalist mode of production. That the Catholicism that seeps right into the very soul of our so-called national cinema are Hispanic, all because for 300 years we had been Hispanic. We had been under the Spaniards. Then count in the recent martial law. Why this anger and protest in those films? Where are they coming from? My role as a historian is to bring out all of these things into the open. And while I was doing that, I found out, my goodness me, there is really a rich heritage of cinematic forms that have been laid outside, wasted out of the, and written out systemically from the writing of our national film heritage and national culture. So I guess my role, as provoked by this conference, I say my final piece by saying exactly that that is my role as a historian. I cannot just confirm what we already consider as the popular cinema, as our national cinema. If we find something out there that's like the speakers who came before me, especially Feliz and Professor Zerudo and Professor Dimitilio, I mean, if we find anything that's problematic in terms of our cultural construction, what are we to do? So I think I am, as a historian and as an author and as a teacher, I want to bring the truth out there. Finally, ito lang, under the digital age, I am being confirmed because cinema right now has exploded like a rhizome, whereas the movie industry is having its downfall. It is getting a hard time recovering from its own pandemic, which is digital and everything else. But try to realize our students are making countless, as we speak, countless short films and documentaries, experimental films, music videos all over the country that we cannot even inventory. It is another problem and another project for cultural historians like myself, how to map exactly the cinema that emerges from the digital era. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry, but can we go over time a little bit just for a few more minutes, no, to answer the last two questions? So one from Dr. Dina Roma and the other one from Dr. Arnie Azcárraga. Dina?
Yes. Good afternoon, Nano. Okay, thank you so much. And really, I had a wonderful time listening to all the presentations of the panelists, and I am. It's heartwarming to know that we have this esteemed researchers and scholars, at the helm of these research areas, and how I wish that we have the funding and the time to pursue all of these streams of study. So thank you so much. I just have a short question directed to Dr. Demeterio, because this is related also to my research. And thank you so much for having that timeline of churches in Leyte. Mine is the island that I have been researching on, is the one found in Basay. It's a small island on Western Samar. And I've also delved into the Moro raid history, and I know that it has really affected the construction or the design of churches during that time. Now, I noticed that during your presentation and in terms of the reconstruction being done for all of this, for some of these churches, there was one point you mentioned that the bell tower that was supposed to have used by the villagers or by the residents, inhabitants of certain towns, they were really used to signal to the rest of the villages or residents that there's going to be an impending Moro raid. Now, you've mentioned that some churches have actually, they no longer have those bell towers. They've been transferred to this and that place point in the area. So I am just wondering, this may be a naive question, but in terms of the historical representation of this reconstruction, how is there a balance between the physical infrastructure, the restoration of this physical infrastructure, vis-a-vis the historical context of this reconstruction? That's it. Thank you.
Dr. Dina, I'm very sorry to tell you that we don't have systematic renovations or restorations there. So the renovations that I'm talking about are destructive renovations, actually. So suddenly they will think to make a structure look Gothic, they will puncture a huge window, and that will weaken the architectural fabric of the masonry. It will just weaken the damage. The earthquake damage will start from that puncture, from that huge window that they punctured. So our book was intended actually to slow down all those things and make the parish priest more reflective in terms of this in terms of these changes. And we're also documenting the changes that are almost becoming heritage structures. For example, the bell tower, the brutally modern bell tower beside a Baroque facade. In a few years' time, it will become 50 years old, and it will be protected by our heritage law. So we're actually telling everyone, do you really wish to maintain this brutally modern, or maybe we can retrieve the original design of this facade, because the Kabalian Church took them 75 years to build. So it crossed the Spanish period, the American period, and the Japanese period, and then finally the Canadians were the ones who finished the Kabalian Church. It took them 75 years to finish. 1892, 1950s. So the style was so. I am not sure about the construction style. We were not able to examine it more closely.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yu. Actually, my concern was I love the Pasay Church, and I have been going there for years. And then after Yolanda, I was so surprised that there was already a golden chandelier hanging from the wall, and I said, "What happened to this?" That was meant as a step toward reconstruction, but then really the meditative space and everything, and it was just like so out of place. But anyway, maraming salamat, Dr.
Wild inspirations, the parish priest, wild inspiration.
Okay, I think Eric would like to add something. Eric, please go ahead.
Yes, it's very heartwarming to listen to many of these interests that we have, particularly with the evolving and far wide-ranging vocabularies that we're putting into our conservation world. Yes, we are very inclined to follow really the value-based, that we have to do extensive research to exactly pinpoint the value of the church. If it's historical, well and good. But I think just like Nick and Feliz and siguro si Professor Demeterio, that if you go back to your histories, you may question again this value-based approach, because this only appeared in 1972 when UNESCO imposed on us that this is the way that you should do your churches, because it has to be value-based. But at the end of the day, looking further back into your histories, how did they really reconstruct their churches? It was very pragmatic. They just needed it to make it functional. What if you go further down before the colonial era? You will be surprised. It was very performative and ritualistic. So these kind of approaches, we have to be very sensitive, because yes, we will follow the canons of our national laws, national agencies, but probing deeper, I think we have to be very, very critical. That's the critical capacity that Feliz has been telling us. So thank you, Dina. I think this is a very good discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think Ms. Feliz would like to add something, please. Go ahead.
Just quickly, I was very touched by what Nick was defending. And it came to mind. Try to imagine, because I really try to make all of our very intellectual concepts, I try to bring them down to very simple, understandable experiences. So just try to imagine that you take food, okay? Food food represents cinema. Food history represents cinematographic history. So we have all these wonderful Filipino dishes, that have come out through the Spanish era. And we cannot take them away from us. We have nativized them. They are ours. They're not Spanish anymore. They're Filipino. Now, what if we decided we were not going to include street food? What if we said, street food doesn't qualify. It's just there. That is very similar to what Nick is trying to explain. I hope, Nick, I did not trivialize.
No, not at all. Thank you so much. I mean, yes, No, thank you so much. I mean, that's why I will reflect so much on the food I'm gonna eat today. Yeah, I mean, cinema, and look, we are now talking in a very interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary way, and thank you for your that additional knowledge. I'm still finishing my book, and I think making some comments comparing cinema to food. It's there in world cinema actually, and thank you for that. It's a great parallel. It's a great metaphor as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Dr. Arnie, I think it's your turn to ask your question. You're the last one.
Oh my goodness, it's almost 12:15.
Okay, that's okay, Dr. Arnie.
Okay, no, I had this private chat with Nick De Ocampo about cinema again, and I had really wanted to discuss that vis-a-vis what was discussed yesterday in terms of the rise of the crowds and generative AI, the things that computers are able to do. And before that is actually also what the masses can do, which used to be only experts and only the richer nations and only a very select few people would be doing. So that was already partly discussed here. So I just wanted to ask in terms of food research, and I'm really happy that I heard things like tomato would have to be after a certain year, ice cream because of electricity and ice and all that would be a certain year. So I wonder whether there are also such studies on the very specific practical side of food where we are able to preserve food by certain ways, like we know that cooking it in vinegar or drying it under the sun or putting salt and seawater. But I wonder whether that is also placed according to periods, pre-Spanish, American, and whatever. How rich is the history on that side of food research?
Well, I'm glad you asked. The first proof we have of drying fish, by the way, is prehistoric, up from the north, thanks to our National Museum archaeologists. There is a chronology to it. I have done work, food scientists have done work, and we have put it into chronology. It has become, it has returned, I guess, as an interest because of the pandemic and the need to preserve. If you're interested in reading on the role of preservation, I strongly suggest you look into the 1937 program of the Philippine Commonwealth that pulled together all the work of food scientists, food home economists, and adult literacy education programs to increase preserved food for food security of individual houses, to increase the earning capacity from cottage industries, and to support the pioneering work of food canneries in the Philippines. This was done partly because of the pending World War and the fact that we needed to conserve the foreign currency reserves that we had. We were spending an abundance on imported food that we could produce locally. So there is much for you to learn. I have a paper on that came out for one of the historical journals a few years ago. I can send the link. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so this is a really an exciting discussion, but I think we have to have lunch already, and and meditate on our food and our heritage. Okay, but before we go off air, maybe have a picture taking. Fernie, can everybody turn on their cam for a photo?
Okay. So 1, 2, 3, and one more piece. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, our applause. Okay, I'm the one clapping on behalf of everybody. our warm applause and bravos and bravas to our panel. Okay, thank you very much for giving us your time, your expertise, for blessing us with the light of your wisdom and knowledge. So much. I think we have so much also to learn. Okay, and to work on. Okay, in relation to Philippine culture and heritage. Okay, the next session, which will be a workshop on the writing of heritage research proposal to be conducted by Dr. Jasmine Liana. It will start at 1:30. Okay, so for the participants, we'll see you then at 1:30. Okay, and thank you to everybody. Have a good lunch. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.